as if family law litigation, isn't enough. Florida was the venue for the next round of estate and probate issues. And probate, everybody talks about probate, and we don't even know what exactly that is, but it's the procedure by which wills and trusts are filed in court, and then the assets of the deceased are then transferred to the heirs. Did you get that? The will and the trust or whatever other documents, they're filed in the courthouse. When someone dies, then everything in the will is then that goes to a certain person will then be transferred to that person. I know in my case, my parents' documents were filed in 2013, when in fact my father died in 2010, my mother in 2011. So things can be switched, things can be changed, all sorts of things can happen to those documents. But I was left defenseless after my interviewing like 30 to 40 attorneys, and they all said, "Sorry, Maria, but we're not allowed to help you." And I was like, "Oh, so what do I do?" And they didn't really have an answer, but it was in the entire state of Florida. And yet I couldn't go outside the state of Florida because it was Florida litigation. And so basically what that let me know is that I was going to be defenseless. And even during the defamation judgment, my attorney, who I had fly in from Pennsylvania for my defense, left. And this was in Chicago. So he flew in from Pennsylvania to Chicago. And he flew in for my defense. And he left before the verdict was read. And he wasn't coming back. And he wanted to spare himself the humiliation and the publicity of losing, despite the fact that it was a false verdict and a miscarriage of justice. And so these things happen to countless people. So I'm not sharing information that many don't know, whether they've been involved or whether their family member has been involved or a friend or whatever. But it's been nearly 14 years since my father died in 2010. And right around the time when my ex-husband sued me again, but this time he sued me in the United States Bankruptcy Court in Tampa to stop the discharge of the bogus defamation judgment. So let me say that again for you. So I get this huge $10 million judgment, right? And so we met with attorneys, my father and I, because my father was just like, "Oh my gosh, $10 million, he's going to take, your inheritance, and that's what he wants." And so the whole thing was just a total ruse. And so we met with different attorneys, and they said, "Well, you know what, file bankruptcy, and you can attach the judgment in with the bankruptcy, and then it should wipe it off." And so I filed for bankruptcy, and then my ex-husband sued me so that he didn't want the debt erased. Obviously, that was the whole point of it, right? And he wanted to keep it. So the bankruptcy judge actually said that if I wrote the letter, because I was truly afraid for my life, which I absolutely was, then she would erase it in bankruptcy. It would be part of the bankruptcy. That was the only reason I filed for the bankruptcy, right? And so the key witness was my oldest son, and his name is Peter. And for years, and during the divorce trial, which was from 1996 to 2001, he insisted on talking to the judge, the divorce court judge, the family law judge. And he wanted to make sure that he could live with me as opposed to 50-50 or living with his father, because he actually went and told the judge that he was afraid of his father, and that he was also afraid for my safety as well. And so that was the key to winning the bankruptcy case, right? And so the judge said, if you were really afraid, and that's why you wrote it, and it wasn't because you were some crazy woman who just wanted to, upset your ex-husband, I'll erase it. And so that is exactly what my son had said. And we had the court transcripts of what he had said. I think it was in 1998, actually, so we could get rid of it. And so um, we never knew that at that time during the divorce, that 10 years later, I would need that transcript, and I would need to bring that up again, because I don't like to think. What I really don't like is when they talk about alienation and how some people keep their children away from their other parent. And I don't believe in that unless the other parent is really psycho or dangerous or something. But that was never my intention. However, my ex-husband knew that what I wanted so much were my children. And so that's when he said, if that's what you want, that's what I'm going to go after. And so he didn't want to do 50-50. He wanted everything. And he wanted total control. And so either children had to be under the rule of their mother or their father. It couldn't be 50-50. He would not allow that. The judge actually decided that since I was sitting in the courtroom, in her courtroom, that Scott hadn't killed me. And so then she said, well, I don't really believe that he threatened you or that you were afraid. And I thought, oh. And I wondered, how does one measure if another person's in fear, right? How would you measure that? Because it's totally subjective. One person is afraid of spiders or snakes, right? And how can someone else say, no, 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 you're not afraid of spiders, you're not afraid of snakes? Well, that person has a fear of snakes. Just because you might have a baby python, in a cage in your bedroom, or you go hiking in the woods barefoot and you're not afraid of coming across a snake, that doesn't mean that other person isn't afraid of them, because it's very subjective. And so the judge actually said she didn't think I was afraid. And yet, the reason I wrote the letter was because law enforcement had urged me to tell the truth and to stop keeping family secrets. And I thought that was a very bold move for them and also for me, because I was the type that I didn't want to air my dirty laundry. And so most people that knew me did not have a clue as to what went on behind closed doors, which is true for many people, actually. I was sitting in that bankruptcy courtroom, and I felt like I was in the Twilight Zone, because I thought, wait a minute. And I was told that the judge had a business relationship with Scott's attorney. And the judge went on to say that malicious intent, I think those were the words that she used, and that with malice, I interfered in his career. And so I should owe him $10 million. And the thing is that the biggest joke about the whole thing is the $10 million was supposed to be for future earnings, that he said he couldn't get a job after I had sent that letter, and that it had ruined his reputation. He said he lost his job, and yet he hadn't lost his job at all, because he had basically retired because his company was bought out. And then after the 2-week trial, and this is the most ridiculous part of all of it, is that in fact, the verdict was on a Friday, and it was Friday, October 6th. And 2006. And on Monday, there were news reports all over the place that he had gotten a fabulous job with a boutique New York investment bank, making a lot of money. And so I thought, wow, that's future earnings that the 10 million was to go for, because they said, oh, by the time he retires, he'd at least make another 10 million. And so since he's not going to be able to do that, and even he won't even have enough money to buy the children's shoes, and you have a rich father, and so you just give him that money. And I thought, oh my gosh. There were 3 people really involved in a lot of this, and it was the ex-husband, Scott, and it was my sister, and it was my son. and they all teamed up together. So here we have the son that actually was telling the divorce court judge that he was totally afraid of his father and he was terrified for me and for himself. And that he said that if he had to spend any time at all with his father, he just couldn't live. And so here you have this child who was traumatized by a very abusive um, man. And what had happened is that the day after the judgment, my son called me he was in Dallas, and he called me and he said, Mom, it's all over the newspapers here and everyone's talking about it. He said, Dad was sending me a message. And I said, what kind of a message is that? And he said he was sending me a message that if I don't side with him, he's going to ruin me, just like he's trying to ruin you. And so he said, all it takes is for him to pick up the phone and call my boss and to besmirch my reputation. And if he does that, I'll lose my job. And he was working for an investment bank in Dallas. I realized that he was afraid. And after that, we had a very tumultuous relationship, actually. You can see how family can become embroiled in this whole toxic mess. While we were married, we made a lot of, well, actually, he made a lot of donations, to political candidates. And he was really smart because what he did is he actually would donate to both of them, like to both candidates, people running against one. He didn't really care who won. He was very strategic, and he wanted to benefit from whomever won and call in favors, right? All I know is there was a lot of my money changing hands and it didn't get to me. And so here, you have the three. You have the ex-husband, the sibling, and the son, all working together. I could feel like I was under a microscope, right? In survival mode. And on the street in 2013, actually. And since then, inch by inch, I've been striving to crawl my way back. And that happens to us. There are so many people that go through, it's not from here to here, a straight line. It's up and down, and there are peaks and valleys and detours and things like that. And so life's like that. And when we can detach from the drama and we can see the beauty of the journey, then we can extricate ourselves in a healthy way. Otherwise, it engulfs us, right? We end up just becoming part of, caught in an undertow, right? Where we just keep flip flopping around and choking and things like that. And so when we can detach and we see that this was all part of the drama, and we're to learn something from it. And so I know that when I lived in three homeless shelters in 2013, after my family started taking everything from me, um, I I actually lived with homeless people. And even though I had never met a homeless person before being one, actually. And so I made a video with a little camera, and it was very, very primitive, but it was something that I knew I was to do. And so I interviewed homeless people and asked them how they got where they got. And so that was wonderful. It's called A National Crisis, and I think it's on YouTube, maybe on my website as well. And then I did the Forgiveness to Love videos, and those are on my website too. How we allow ourselves to be so manipulated, and how we are actually affected by tainted food and greedy family, right? And so I also made a video titled My Dear Mr. President, which is all about legal reform and how desperately we need it in this country, in this world of ours, really. And so you've heard about all the pending class action suits, right? With Camp Lejeune and the poisoned water and the Parkinson's and things like that. And there are so many. There's about the hernia mesh, and then there's about the ovarian cancer, and then there's the talc, Johnson and Johnson, These are all class action suits. And so people have been getting seriously ill, and it's wonderful that finally people are coming together and bringing this out into the open. The only thing is, you hope that in fact the people that have been injured will be the ones benefiting from the judgments. I know most of those are in tens of millions of dollars that have been set aside in order to compensate the victims. However, these people are so ill because of the horrible, asbestos and Roundup and whatever else. But where the victims are so seriously ill, and you hope that they get it, and it's not just drumming up business for attorneys. You want to make sure that the public actually benefits in the way that they absolutely deserve. And so, and I've been told that in terms of my family shadow banning me, which I didn't even know what that was. But yeah, they hide my audience, and so they want to hide their crimes, the ones you're going to hear about today. And so, in this day and age, we really, whether we were injured because of a product that the manufacturers knew about ahead of time and that was going to cause some health concerns for us, or whether we just stand tall when the darkness slanders us, right, and humiliates us and alienates us and shuns us and tries to throw us away. Because as I knew, my life was in danger, and which I talked to you about, one of the main reasons I wrote the letter was because of the order of protection he got against me for harassment, and then the defamation judgment that he got. And so he was able to basically gag me, because after that I wasn't allowed to speak. I wasn't allowed to speak of what he was doing or what he had done to me or what he was doing to me. This is America. And last time I checked, we supposedly, it's the land of free speech. And not in a way that is to hurt another person. It's to stand up for ourselves. And that's the biggest difference that I see when people say, oh, it's just malicious or whatever. It's truth. Sometimes the truth isn't welcomed by those who have committed certain infractions. But that still doesn't negate the truth, right? I thank God for my blessings in escaping so many, plots to have done me, and where my family strategized, right? And it's just horrible to even think that people we loved are like that or do that. But I knew it was time to return to Florida, actually, for the truth of all that happened with my parents. I did. I came to Tampa, and I'm still here. My family has refused to speak to me about after they locked me out of my home. And all I knew about that is that they said I couldn't go near my home. And if I did, the guards were instructed to call the police and have me removed. And so my condo, I was living on Clearwater Beach, as I said, and my condo was purchased by my father for me in 2004 when I moved from Chicago to the Tampa Bay area, to Clearwater. That was part of my inheritance. And so when I wasn't able to get anybody to talk to me, and then I called my son actually at one point, and I said, let's talk about this, because if you claim to own my condo, and like you've hardly visited it, and now you own it. And I said, you know what, if it's so important to you, because of course my money would go to my heirs, right? And he's one of 4 of my children. And I said, if you want, I'll give you the condo, but I need to live there. And he just said, don't bother me. If you have a problem with anything, just call my lawyer. And I thought, oh my God, like that is really horrible. And so he not only got my condo, but he also got a huge amount of money, and then began defaming me so that I couldn't even get a job. And he and my sister, and I don't know who did it, or I think they just kind of worked together actually, because the ex by that time, well, not by that time, but the ex, I think around 2015 to 2017, perhaps, that's when the ex um, passed on. And I didn't even know that until years later. And because I found out that I was entitled to Social Security survivor benefits. So I called the Social Security office and I said, look, my ex husband, I hear, has passed, and I hear I'm entitled to the benefits. We were married 21 years. Yeah. I put in a lot of money in that. And so they said, well, you have to have his exact date of death. And they said, call the county clerk. So I called the county clerk. I sent all the forms and everything, and they said, well, we can't find his death certificate. And if we can't find his death certificate, you don't get those benefits. And I thought, oh my gosh, that is really crazy. And it's been, what was it, since 2017 or 2016? And so that's like 6 or 7 years. I haven't gotten those benefits because I can't provide a sheet of paper, because no one tells me that there's a death certificate. And in fact, people are trying to tell me, well, maybe he's still alive. Well, maybe he is, I don't know. But based on the information I have, he's long gone. That's another um, travesty of justice, isn't it? Because when you are entitled to something and yet some office won't provide that information to you, and that's the only way you can get it, that's wrong. You know, and I remember even finding the clerk of Cook County on Facebook and writing her. And her office called me and said, well, call this person because this person will go through everything and find it. And they said, well, we can't find the death certificate, so too bad, lady. And so I thought, wow, that's pretty crazy. And so without that, and with the sabotage of my being able to get a job or my being able to progress in any way, without my family kind of breathing down my neck and knowing whom I call and what I say and what I do and where I am. It's, yeah, I hear I'm monitored and surveyed 24/7. And so it's, if I have an idea, oh, I'm going to call somebody, all of a sudden, if I call them or if I look up the number or whatever, they're on my phone. And so they'll block it. And so I didn't even know this. I had no idea about this until someone told me. And actually, someone told me that he had met my sister, who had actually flown to California, where I was, in order to kind of interfere in my life that I was building there. Of course, I was living in a car. He told me that, in fact, she had offered him $2 million to get rid of me. And I found that just absolutely horrifying. And again, this is hearsay. This is what I was told, and that she desperately wants my writing and wants to be me, and so this is just so absolutely bizarre. I can't even tell you. Those people in power casually discard us. Now, what I have heard, and again, this is what I've heard, is that because she was working so closely with my ex-husband, who had a lot of political allies, she benefited from that. So the two of them were kind of like a team. And I had no idea that actually during my divorce, they were working together. I never thought that they ever spoke because she lived in Florida, in Bel Air, right next to Clearwater. And so she lived there with her husband, and we lived in Kenilworth, in a Chicago suburb. I had no idea, but apparently the two of them were conspiring and working together because both of them hated me. And so I was thinking, and they wanted, well, Scott definitely wanted my inheritance, and my sister apparently wanted it too. And so, anyway, I want you to know that however physically and mentally agonizing your journey, yes, I pray that you're able to see your life as a testament to who you are on a soul level, right? Who you truly are, because that's the only thing that we really are. We are energetic beings, we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And so, if you had the opportunity to sit down with Jesus, with the Christ, or with Buddha, or with the energy of the universe, or however you want to label that most amazing energy of all creation, the creator and the created, right? And so, and your angels and your archangels and the heavenly beings and your heavenly helpers. And did I say guardian angels? But with the energy of God, God Almighty, to share your story, what you've endured, what you've learned, and what you ultimately stand for, right? If you could do that, what would you say? And what would you share? And how do you see yourself? Do you bury yourself in dysfunction of the material world, right? Or do you stand up for truth? And, because most people, they don't really go to that depth, right? It's more about just getting through the day, and it's about buying, and it's about conspicuous consumption, and it's about material goods and things like that. And we're worried about what we're going to eat, what we're going to wear, where we're going to go, what we're going to do, instead of like thinking about who we really are and why we go through so many things that we go through as we progress along our journey of life. And so, as I was a sheltered little Greek girl who laughed and loved and played with doggies and kittens. I had one kitten named Fluffy, and my doggies, and Athena and Aphrodite, and basked in music and laughter and food and snuggles. And when I was a little girl, my grandparents were still alive, and I had, well, through actually my adult life, I had a favorite Uncle George that I loved. I loved more than anything. And I had a doting Nana who was my grandfather's sister. And so, like so many of you, my life was pretty much worried free, right? As we grow up as children, unless we take on the white knuckle travails of what, like Beaver, the beef. What was he gonna go through? Or Lassie, or even even Mark Swelby, or any of those shows, the family shows. And as we grow, so do our challenges, right? We see who we are not. And most often we see this in our family, actually, because we see behavior that we want nothing to do with, right? And it's behavior that tells us to run away. Run, run, Maria, run far, far away, because we see what makes people tick. And often we don't want any part of it, because that's not who we are. We're better than that. And so for my family, they seemed only too happy to steal what was mine and claim it all as their own, and then live off of it right now for what, 14 years, something like that. Had I not lived it, I would have never believed it, because I have written, I have emailed, I have called, I've gone to my sister's home in Bel Air. I've gone to her husband's office, his medical office. I have left messages. I've emailed. I've done everything I could. I've even contacted Irene's attorney, who is one of her neighbors in Bel Air. And I left an email there and a phone message. And nothing. No one. Everybody just wants me to just go away. Yeah, just leave your money here, but you just kind of go on your way, and we might try to just kind of obliterate you at some point. Um, but uh, we just don't want to be anything like them, right? We realize, though, that no one cares. At least no one that I knew cared. And no one would give me not even $1. I mean, they had millions and millions of my money, and yet um, I couldn't. I had no credit because they stole my identity too. And so I didn't have a place to live. I didn't have food to eat. I didn't have clothing to wear. I didn't have a bathroom to shower. I didn't even have my personal possessions to treasure, which were, photos of my children and things that my children had given me. So simple things that the civilized world takes for granted. And yet, when we have narcissists in our family that shamelessly kind of stuff their mouths, right, and their stomachs and their closets and their homes and their cars and more, never give us a thought. Um, Maybe their every thought was actually of me, instead of thinking that, oh no, they don't think of me at all. Maybe they think of me all the time because they're trying to figure out how they're going to try to shut me up, right? Because they don't want any of this out. In terms of their hunting themselves, I do believe that the universe is that there is divine justice, and that karma's a big thing. No one gets away with anything. I mean, really, the bottom line of life on planet Earth, I believe, is to become the very best version of yourself, and to rise above any challenges you have, and to embrace the good out there. And so when you see a butterfly, or you see a bird, or um, you hear a rooster, or you hear a child singing or giggling, or all the wonderful things, a cat meowing, a dog barking, and when you hear those things, and they're so sensual, and if you go into the water, go and whether you're in a waterfall, or you're taking a shower even, or you're in the Gulf of Mexico or in the Pacific Ocean, whatever, everything we do, it's just such a blessing. It's such a gift. And so my parents, Dr. James Haiti, he was a retired OBGYN, and he loved delivering babies. And so I think part of my passion for life was due to how he used to talk about always wanting to be an obstetrician, because he brought in such good things into the world. And there was nothing more beautiful than a mother nursing the baby that just came out of her uterus. And so it's so beautiful. And so anyway, let me just tell you. So my father was Dr. Haiti, okay, and his name was James. We'll call him James, as we're using everybody's first names. And my mother was Bessie. And they owned a condo in Clearwater Beach, on Sand Key, which is a little island there. And it was called, the name of the building is Dan's Island. And so they owned a condo, and it was number 414. And they basically had two documents in their estate plan, a will and a trust. So the estate plan really just couldn't be more simple, right? And so you had two documents, and both indicating that the entire estate was to be equally divided 50-50 between their two daughters, Maria and Irene, right? Easy. And these records are all public. And so, interestingly, Scott, my ex-husband, had been my father's stockbroker at Merrill Lynch prior to our marriage. And he monitored our family's financial accounts. And he knew more about my parents' wealth than my parents. And doctors aren't exactly the most financially savvy people, if you know what I mean, on the planet. And my father wanted someone who was an expert in money management, because my dad said, I don't have time for that. I go to the hospital, I do surgery, I see my patients, and I don't have time for this other stuff. And so um, when Scott met my parents, um, he wanted to show my father that he was an expert. So he portrayed himself very, very convincingly. So he perfectly fit the bill. And in fact, later, I realized, when I realized that he wasn't really into women anyway, that that was why he wanted to marry me, was because he knew all about the money, more than any of us in the family. And he did say, he said, I'm going to just keep suing and suing and suing until I get everything I want. And so, at first when you hear that kind of stuff, you just go, oh, that's so ridiculous. You can't do that. And yet, yeah, he did. So anyway, for 4 decades, my father's directive in documents and depots and things like that was that each daughter inherit one half of the estate. And so it was very straightforward. You didn't have to be an astrophysicist, right? In order to figure that one out. It's 50-50, 2 daughters, 2 condos, a huge estate smack down the middle, and it's going to be inherited by the 2 girls. However, as it turned out, only one of the 2 daughters was a chief beneficiary, right? And inherited the fortune, and one of my 4 children. So you have 1 daughter and 1 grandchild taking it all. And I, along with my 3 other children, were each given $1,000. $1,000 in an estate, from an estate that is worth millions and millions and millions. And they took my home too, and everything in it. It was just too ridiculous. It seems to me that children inherit from their parents after their parents pass on, right? And so you don't inherit from your grandparents, because your grandparents will leave whatever, probably to their children, and then from there it goes to their grandchildren from their parents. And so the reason why my kids were even listed in the will and the trust was because my dad was protecting them from Scott stealing their inheritances. And so the reason why he did that was because if something should have happened to me, then all of a sudden the money would go to my children, right? Well, if they were minors, then who's going to manage that money but Scott, their only surviving parent, right? And so my father then put a clause in the will and in the trust that said that my children would not get their inheritance until they were at least 25 years old. And that's because then they would be old enough to manage their own money without their father's interference. And so I agreed with my dad, and I told him that was a great idea.